a woman who could do a lot of good, has a great empathetic feel for particularly deprived children, but is also someone who is highly manipulative, greedy, needy, and not very, shall we say, wise in the decisions she makes.
In a whirlwind of financial scandal, Sarah Ferguson's name has been tied to controversy for decades, but now, shocking documentation from her former assistant is shedding light on her behavior as an employer. What is the truth about Fergie's refusal to pay wages? What Sarah Ferguson was really like behind the carefully managed public image has shocked even those who tried to defend her. Her former assistant has come forward through documented emails, exposing details of a financial disaster marked by entitlement, broken promises, and a sense of disregard for those who worked for her. These documented accounts paint a troubling picture of a woman who seemed oblivious to the consequences of her actions. The shocking truth about her financial behavior is finally being revealed, and it's more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Stay tuned as we dive into the secrets that have been kept hidden for far too long.
She was a disruptor like Meghan Markle. I mean, she felt that, the rules didn't apply to her. And that's where the tensions began with palace officials. But there were a whole series of problems.
The email at the center of this scandal is dated February 17, 2011, but has not been seen publicly until recently. It was sent by Johnny O'Sullivan, who at the time was Sarah Ferguson's personal assistant. The email was addressed to Amanda Thirk, who was then Prince Andrew's private secretary. Both Andrew and Sarah were copied into the exchange. The reason for the email was simple and devastating. O'Sullivan had not been paid. According to the email, he was owed just under $60,000 in unpaid wages. Originally, the amount was over $72,000, but he agreed to reduce it in an attempt to reach some kind of agreement. That reduction alone tells you how desperate the situation had become.
And I think you can trace this strong sense of inferiority, her desire to please, her extravagance, her generosity, which comes from this desire to make friends.
In the email, O'Sullivan stated clearly that financial arrangements had been agreed directly between himself, the Duke, and the Duchess for more than 2 months. Yet there was still no plan in place to pay him. He explained that he had endured real hardship because of the non-payment, and that he was struggling to support himself while trying to pay for his MBA course at a Columbia University. This was not a casual reminder email. It was a formal plea. And it's worth pausing on this. This is not a tabloid headline or palace gossip. This is someone putting in writing that they were owed money for work already done, that they had waited months patiently, and that they were now under serious financial strain.
That the Duchess of York did indeed get in touch with Jeffrey Epstein, of course, the late paedophile financier who was connected to the Yorks. Many people, including Donald Trump, allegations that he was a friend of his as well.
What happened next is where things get even more uncomfortable because Sarah Ferguson did not pay that debt herself. Instead, the money was covered by Jeffrey Epstein, who stepped in and paid O'Sullivan around $15,000. That payment allowed the immediate pressure to ease, but it did not solve the wider problem. At the time, Sarah's overall debts were estimated to be around $5 million, £5 million. This was not an isolated cash flow issue. This was a pattern. Money came in, but it also went out just as fast, usually faster. By 2011, Sarah was, of course, no longer a working royal, but the habits appeared unchanged.
To Jeffrey Epstein, and it's now been made public, and she called him a supreme friend. Now this, of course, Russell, was after she said she didn't want anything to do with him, and she was appalled by what she'd learned about his behaviour.
Unpaid staff wages are not a small administrative slip. They are a red line for most employers. And yet here we have an assistant having to email a royal private secretary, copying in both Andrew and Sarah, spelling out that despite agreements, despite reductions, despite patience, he still had not been paid. That alone says a lot about how broken the system had become. After the story broke publicly, Sarah Ferguson admitted that taking money from Epstein had been, in her words, a gigantic error of judgment. She said she would never have anything to do with him again and made clear statements condemning sexual abuse.
Let me explain why. The charities linked to Sarah Ferguson on Monday certainly moved quickly to distance themselves from her.
But even there, the financial context is key. She did not say the debt was not real. She did not deny that the wages were owed. The issue was not whether money was owed, but who ended up paying it. What often gets lost in the wider scandal is that at its core, this was about unpaid wages. Someone worked, someone was not paid, someone else stepped in to settle it. That is the paper trail, and it fits neatly into what many former associates have described over the years. Chaotic finances, promises made, payments delayed, negotiations to reduce what was owed, and eventually a bailout. Complete lack of accountability while others pay the price.
They're cut loose now, and she doesn't have the protection of the royal family, and she's going to need to make money. This six-figure fee will become seven figures. The juicier the gossip is.
Yes.
So she's going to be sort of pushed towards saying as much as she possibly can.
It's also telling that this email was printed out and kept. The photograph showing the email on the desk was taken years later in 2015 during a photo shoot at Epstein's home. The email was still there, 4 years after it was sent. Why keep it? Why have it printed out and sitting on the desk like that? The exact reason is unclear, but the fact it existed and was preserved tells us this was not viewed as trivial. Someone thought this was worth keeping, worth documenting, worth preserving as evidence of what had transpired. Sarah Ferguson had a long history of financial instability. By 2011, that instability had reached the point where a senior member of her staff was owed tens of thousands in wages and had to formally complain. The debt was not settled by Sarah herself, but by a third party. And this was happening against the backdrop of millions in accumulated debt. If you step back and look at it plainly, it paints a picture that is sadly consistent. Lavish spending followed by financial shortfalls, reliance on others to step in, repeated public embarrassment, promises to do better, and then another crisis.
I predicted weeks ago that if you turf Fergie out, she's a loose cannon, she becomes dangerous. And just 2 weeks ago, it was announced that Andrew, Mountbatten Windsor, will be accommodated on the Sandringham estate at the expense of the king.
The behavior O'Sullivan documented fits into a larger pattern of financial irresponsibility and lack of empathy, traits that have defined Sarah Ferguson's reputation in certain circles for years. As the years went by, more stories emerged about her shocking disregard for financial obligations. From mounting debts to broken promises, Sarah's behavior was often seen as a manifestation of her belief that normal rules didn't quite apply to her in the same way. Make sure you're subscribed because we continue to bring you the documented truth about royal scandals. These stories need to be told. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. For many observers, this sense of entitlement was at the root of her troubles, with her acceptance of money from convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein to pay this very debt, acting as perhaps the most damaging example of how chaotic her financial world had become.
She would have staff there and require them to be on hand, and then at the last minute, having cooked meals for her, she would decide to go to a restaurant, for example. She would come back late at night from parties and expect the staff to rustle up a meal for her at sort of midnight.
Years before this documented scandal came to light, there were warning signs visible to those who paid attention. Financial advisors and observers who knew about her spending habits immediately noticed traits that were troubling. She was described as someone who spent without clear boundaries, who made commitments she couldn't keep, and who seemed unable to adjust her lifestyle to match her actual financial means. These observations were more than just passing comments. They now read almost like prophetic warnings. According to those familiar with her situation, Sarah appeared unable to learn from financial mistakes, a trait that would prove to be a defining characteristic of her post-royal years.
You remember that Jeffrey Epstein had lent her a huge sum of money, £15,000, to try and attempt to clear her debts. And she apologised in that email after he had been convicted of sex offences.
Despite her royal connections and despite the income from various ventures, the spending consistently outpaced what was coming in. The unpaid wages scandal would eventually bring this chaos into sharp focus, and the fact that Jeffrey Epstein had to step in to pay her employee would expose just how severe the situation had become. But long before the O'Sullivan email emerged, Sarah had already displayed a pattern of financial struggles, mounting debts, and a disconnect between lifestyle and actual means, traits that were now being documented in ways that could no longer be dismissed or ignored.
Were very extravagant, lived beyond their means, were in debt, were, I wouldn't quite say social climbers, but they were networkers, and pretty ruthless and pretty promiscuous.
This pattern of financial chaos ties back to larger questions about accountability and responsibility. It's not just about accumulating debt. Many people struggle financially. It's about the apparent inability to recognize how one's financial decisions directly harm others, especially people who depend on you for their income and livelihood. The unpaid wages incident serves as a clear example of what happens when financial responsibility breaks down completely. Normal rules about paying employees seem not to apply in the same way.
When you've agreed to do the interview,
the book has already been released, and the thing is, I'm not going to go down to this point. I'm going to answer your questions, but that's done. It's finished. I've answered it. Thank you very much.
The email makes clear that agreements had been made directly with both Andrew and Sarah. Those agreements were not honored for months. Even after O'Sullivan reduced what he was owed by more than $12,000, a massive concession, there was still no plan to actually pay him. He was left struggling to support himself and pay for his education while waiting for money he had already earned. The warning signs were visible long before this particular scandal emerged. From early reports of mounting debts to stories of lavish spending that didn't match income, the pattern was consistent. Both point to someone who struggled to align financial reality with lifestyle expectations, someone who made commitments without always having clear plans to honor them. And in the end, it was this disconnect between promises and actions that led to situations like O'Sullivan's, documented, undeniable, and deeply troubling. The unpaid wages case serves as one clear example in what had become a much larger story of financial instability.
And there's going to be more, and the more she says, the more she'll get. Maybe this is a shot across the bows. Maybe she's going to go and do this, and maybe it encourages the royal family to just pay her to keep quiet.
By accepting money from Jeffrey Epstein to pay a debt she herself owed to her own employee, Sarah Ferguson created a scandal that revealed far more than just poor judgment about associates. It revealed a financial system that had broken down so completely that a convicted criminal ended up being the one to ensure her assistant got paid. The fact that this email still existed years later, sitting on a desk in Epstein's home, raises questions that may never be fully answered. But what is documented, what is undeniable, is the core fact. An employer owed wages. Those wages went unpaid despite agreements and reductions, and eventually a third party had to cover the debt.
Is that it then, for Fergie, do you think? Is that the last that we will see of her, in public life at least?
Well, no, I think never say never with Fergie. She's a great survivor. She will quietly do things under the radar. I mean, there are plenty of people, particularly in places like China or the Middle East.
In the years since this scandal emerged, Sarah Ferguson has worked to rebuild her public image. She has spoken about learning from mistakes and moving forward, but the documentation remains. The email exists. The pattern it represents is part of the permanent record. For Johnny O'Sullivan, who had to send that desperate email, who had to reduce what he was owed just to try to get some resolution, who had to wait months for payment while struggling to support himself, his experience stands as a testament to what can happen when financial responsibility breaks down and when normal obligations are not honored.